This is the first of two videos that I wanted to make today for Dawn at Tapestry Institute. This first video is going to be a response to the five questions you gave me regarding our collaborative consultation with Dr. Gordon and the things that you needed to hear or see in my voice. I haven't sat down and done any of the writing yet, and so this is why I thought I should make a quick video, because at least this gets something out your way, and then you can work with it or let me know if there's something that I definitely need to write myself. Then I can do that. But I did think I could at least address your questions best I can here in the video quickly, and so I'm not hopefully not holding up progress on the report too long. So the first question you had was in regard to Narcissus and the piece where I am quoting him from one of our talks where he describes the influence of Henry Ford's assembly line on mainstream education. That I've yet to dig up. I've got to still have to listen to some of those recordings and find some excerpts for you. But you mentioned in the letter you realized that might take me a little longer to do. So I won't hold it up too long, though. I'll get it done hopefully even tonight or over the weekend. I'll get a chance to listen to some of our old talks and see if I can find a piece about that. The second thing that you asked was whether I wanted to say anything about the conflicted feelings that I had during my day of travel when things weren't going well. And yeah, so, and by the way, Dawn, feel free to share this video with Sean or Dr. Gordon or any of the others, and I'm probably just going to post it up on my YouTube channel and email you a link. And I think some of the things that you're asking about others might be interested in hearing, so I'm just going to put it up publicly if you don't mind. So the day that I traveled, that I was supposed to be coming to New York to have our consultation, as you're aware, I had setbacks. I got to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then the plane that was supposed to take me to LaGuardia got on the runway, but ended up turning back to the terminal because a plane had crashed on the runway in LaGuardia. And so they closed the airport, and they said they expected it to be closed for at least 5 hours as they cleaned things up there, and that so our flight was canceled, and they would try to get us booked on the next available. So that I did get a ticket for a 7 o'clock flight that night, and then they also put me on standby for 3 o'clock. And when the 3 o'clock one rolled around, didn't take off at 3. The LaGuardia was still closed. Eventually, about 5 o'clock, then it was going to fly, and they were able to get me on there on standby. So I got on the plane, took off, and did not reach LaGuardia. We ended up going down in Detroit. And at that point, even before that, I was having my reservations about how to proceed, because it was just very recently that we had lost Narcissus, and some of the circumstances surrounding his passing included travel that he was doing, and a sign perhaps that he should stay home. What had happened was he left his house to go to the airport, got about halfway there, and realized that he had not taken his wallet. So he had to go all the way back home and fetch his wallet, and then go up to the airport to catch a flight. And a lot of us here, kind of see that maybe it was a sign, and maybe we wish he would have just stayed home at that point. And so when things started to go wrong with me at Minneapolis St. Paul's, even with the first flight not taking off, I started to think, um, you know, it just reminded me of that, what happened so recently, and I didn't want to not pay attention to the signs, and especially after I came down in Detroit. By then my wife at home was getting pretty upset too. She was telling me, um, you should just maybe turn around and come home. And so I remember talking to you, Dawn, and talking to Priya about the situation, and I was, my gut was telling me that I needed to quit, that I wasn't supposed to go to New York, and but at the same time, I did feel very conflicted because um, a, a little bit of money had been spent on me on flying me to New York, and I felt obligated. And I don't, it's not necessarily kind of a polemical conflict between an indigenous um, way and this intuitions that I had versus a mainstream expectations and this kind of thing. I mean, there was some of that there for sure, but mainly there was my sense of feeling obligated to the group, and I was very honored to be asked to be a part of the consultation, um, and I didn't want to let the group down, and especially because some money had been spent. And at the same time, though, like my gut was telling me, it's time to stop. So I was very glad when I talked to you and you kind of let me off the hook and let me know that it's okay to follow my intuition. In fact, it's preferable, that I was demonstrating one of the key points of the consultation in following my intuition. And so we had determined that I could just stay in Detroit and participate still in the consultation via Skype or phone, um, or phone conference, and that worked. And as it turned out, of course, while I was there, I realized there was a reason for why I had landed in Detroit, and that was Narcissus' part, and it wasn't necessarily that I was in any danger going to New York. And after I had that realization, then I actually did go to New York and finish out some of the other plans that I had intended to carry out there. So yeah, so the conflict, like I said, the conflict is not necessarily indigenous versus mainstream. The conflict was more. There was some of that there, but it was very much me feeling obligated. And yeah, it is definitely that kind of bend into my intuition and fear of these signs and such might be considered a superstitious in the mainstream and would be frowned upon. But so there was a little bit of that play in there, but more than that, it was just my wanting to really fulfill what I said I would do. And that goes on here too. In Blackfoot country, there is also a sense that when you say you're going to do something, you need to carry through and do it. Once it's out there, once it's said, then you're not supposed to back off of it. Except there are circumstances, and that's where people here sometimes get tripped up too. Like say for instance, they say I'm gonna put on a sweat, on this day, and that day comes and there's 100-mile-per-hour winds. It's very dangerous to put a fire on the prairie during windy days, like that. My own elder with the beaver bundle, um, in those kind of circumstances, would totally support doing the sweat another day. But there are a lot of people who say, well, I already said I would do it, so I got to do it on such and such a day. They get caught up on the very particulars, and really, I was still able to do what I said I would do with the consultation. I didn't have to necessarily go all the way to New York to do it, and so that made me feel good, and I was glad that the money was not such a huge factor that it would delimit me from following the intuition, and it ended up, I think, helping the consultation a great deal that I went to Detroit. So that's what I have to say about that. Kind of long-winded. Maybe you can extract what you need from there. Your third question had to do with, I think, the story of the Niskim that I shared, that Buffalo Rock, and the way that the pedagogical techniques employed by the elder in that circumstance, and whether I had any ideas about how to represent that experience in our report without giving away or spoiling the lesson, potentially spoiling the lesson for others. And that's a good question. It's one that I've asked myself a lot of different times. Because I do like to share that story. I think it's beneficial for people to hear that story. And so I've never figured out a way to do it, to share that experience and talk about it without just telling exactly what happened. And so that's what I did during our consultation, and that's what I normally do when I'm telling the story to my students and that kind of thing here at home. I have, however, interestingly been accused of being overly critical of that elder. Some students pick up on that aspect of the story alone and kind of like get stuck there, and so it's been a kind of a dangerous story to tell all around for that reason, and because I'm potentially interfering with somebody's own learning by giving the answers that I came up with, and so I don't know. I don't mind sharing it because I think it's important for people to know or to hear about the employment of that kind of pedagogy and to hear that story. Some people might not have been as reflective in that scenario as I was, and might not have caught the lesson. I think I was kind of lucky in that sense, lucky and then not, because what was done to me put my mind to work trying to sort it out. So I think it's part of the pedagogy, but I think that people do miss it because a lot of people don't ask enough questions in general. They don't follow that inquiry-based type of learning. And so I know, again, with my own elder, with the Beaver Bundle, if you don't ask questions, he's not going to share very much. He's going to give you some basics, but if you want the real in-depth teachings, you have to ask the right questions. So I think it's an important story to tell. I don't mind it being in the report, but I recognize why you have some reservations about that, and if you think it maybe should not be in the report, then that's fine too. All right, so what were the other questions? I think there was two more. One of them dealt with the stories that I told about protection of knowledge and intellectual property and that kind of a thing. For a while here, in the in maybe 2003, 4, 5, this concept of intellectual property, this concept went through the community. Everybody would learn this word, but nobody really knew what this was about. And it became something that was used in some ways by for gatekeeping, in a way, for gatekeeping knowledge. The whole idea was that you didn't want somebody from the outside commandeering some traditional knowledge and making a profit out of it, and just using it for the wrong purposes. But it ended up being used against, say, our students, for instance, where they might not be able to pursue certain types of inquiries because of this notion about intellectual property and this fear. And in fact, one time we hosted a 2-day event with a bunch of the elders, and to have them tell us some of the traditional origin stories. And a big part of that event was set back. The whole first day was kind of botched over this concern for intellectual property, even though everybody that was in there to participate in this is from the community. And so it was kind of sad. But yeah, so I know that the topic was kind of lingering around, not necessarily intellectual property, but the protection of the knowledge that we might share in this report for the consultation. And so I just wanted to give my perspective on it, which is that I feel like a lot of traditional knowledge needs to be shared. That in a way we're kind of too hung up a lot of times on the protection of it, and that this is putting the knowledge in jeopardy. So I told two short stories in regard to that. One had to do with not myself, but a friend of mine from Amaskapi Pikani, from the southern Blackfeet Nation, John Murray, and he and his wife Carol were running a Blackfoot Studies program at the Blackfeet Community College, and they were teaching a lot of traditional knowledge in the courses. They were sharing a lot of traditional knowledge, and he had invited an elder as a guest one day. And so the elder sat in on the class and participated with the class, and then went back to John's office afterwards. And while he's in John's office, he asked, he asked him, well, aren't you concerned with the things that you're sharing in class? Aren't you concerned about our intellectual property? And John told him, well, go out in the hallway and grab any one of our students and ask them to tell you about Makoyoxoko, which is the Milky Way. And there's a really important Blackfoot story dealing with the Milky Way and its relationship to Blackfoot cosmology. So John told him, go out and get one of the students and ask them to tell you about it. They won't know what you're talking about. Is that what you mean by intellectual property? And what he was pointing out was basically that the important knowledge was not being shared and was not being transferred between the generations, such that what should be common knowledge was not. And so that was one of the stories that I shared. The other one had to do with traditional land use study, and something that happened during the traditional land use study at Red Crow College, where I worked. I think in 2003 or 2004, the students in that traditional land use program were interviewing the elders and about where to get medicinal or ceremonial plants, and on the reserve, and how they collected them and their knowledge about those plants and those kind of things. And so each of the students kind of had set questions that they would ask the elders, and one of the questions that one of the ladies had was, how do you feel about outsiders, white people, knowing about this traditional knowledge about the plants? And for the most part, when she asked that question, the elders in the interviews just went right along with it. I mean, it is kind of a leading question, and they said, no, we don't agree with that. That this is our knowledge. It was given to us. It shouldn't be shared with them. And that was the case until it came to my wife's late grand uncle, Francis Heavyhead. And I really loved listening to Francis's interview, because it was just a crack. First of all, he told the students that he didn't know anything about plants when they first started the interview, and this is the way Francis normally was. He'd tell you he doesn't know anything about a topic, but if you start actually exploring it with him, you find he knows quite a bit. So that's what the students did. They started asking him questions. Well, have you ever picked sweetgrass? Have you ever picked Saskatoons and chokecherries and such and such? Just started asking him regarding the plants that are mostly used in ceremony. And of course he'd done it all, right? So he did actually have quite a bit of experience. And when it came to the sweetgrass, one of the things that most of the elders had instructed with the students was how to identify it, by the purple base of the grass stem, right where it meets the ground. The stem turns purple, and so with Francis, the students said, okay, well, when you're out looking, when you're going to go pick sweetgrass, how do you find it? Do you look at the really leading questions? Not, they're given the answers to them in a sense. So, but they said, how do you identify it when you're out there and you want to pick sweetgrass? Do you go to the base of the stem and look for the purple color? And Francis told them, no. I'm just walking around out there and I see, oh, there's some sweetgrass, and I pick it. And that's what I really love, how he gets right through the BS, down to the reality of reality of it is, if you know sweetgrass, you just see it. It's just like anything else. It's just like knowing what berry is a Saskatoon. You just know it, right? So that was that part. And then came the question for Francis, well, what do you think about white people or outsiders knowing about our plants? And Francis kind of laughed at the question, and he said, I think they already know. They're the ones with the herbal stores in Lethbridge. He says, besides, psalmists, they're medicines. What do you want to do? Hide them? And I really liked Francis's take. And again, to me, it speaks a lot to this perpetuation of fear that people have done over traditional knowledge sharing. And my own approach to it has been that traditional knowledge needs to be shared. And there is, some here and there that is accessed through ceremony, but there's a lot that should be common knowledge that should be shared today, and that rarely is. And a lot of traditional knowledge can only come through experience. Sometimes you can, like my colleague, Dwayne Mistaken Chief, whenever the topic of intellectual property would come up, he would say, well, I can tell you all about, what I've learned through my transfers, but unless you've done it, it's not yours. It's still, it's forever my intellectual property, and if you do the experience yourself, then you'll have it. So anyway, that's my take on that. Now, am I missing a question? I'm missing a fifth question. Let me pull up the email quick and I'll see what I'm missing. why did we choose not to offer our program Ghana Studies to students in Poland? That was another story that I told. And yeah, there was a time when I think it was the University of Poland, pretty sure it was the University of Poland, was meeting with us regularly, um, with myself and a couple of my colleagues, via Skype, to discuss the idea of starting some of our courses, distance learning in Poland. Over there in Eastern Europe, there has been a long-standing fascination with North American First Nations cultures. And at the University of Poland, they said they do a lot of distance learning. There's a lot of people from all over Poland, Germany, Eastern Europe in general, who take their courses from a distance. So one of the most popular courses is a kind of a course on an old Nordic language that's pretty much an extinct language. Like nobody just speaks it today, but people still study it. And the people we were talking to said, people are so fascinated by that course. We often have 500 students a semester taking that course. However, we feel that if you offered a Blackfoot language course, it would be even more popular. And so you could expect at least 500 students a semester in that course. And if you did, an additional second course in your culture, then that would be equally popular as well. So you could expect, tuition from 1,000 students a semester. And to us, that sounded really good because, as a small tribal college, we were always faced with issues with not having enough revenue, relying off of little temporary project grants to kind of run the show. And so, so the president had asked me to negotiate with Poland since they were interested and see if we could get something up and running. It went all the way to the stages where we were going to advertise for the courses in the train systems, in the trains and the train stations in Poland. And the advertising guys were talking to me, and they said, we need a story. We need a story that we're telling through the ad about why people are taking these courses. And I told them, well, my perspective is this. We know that there's a long-standing fascination with North American First Nations cultures in Eastern Europe. So what I would like to demonstrate through our courses is a way of life that comes from a certain place, that is connected to the ecology of that place, that reflects that ecology, that's part of it. And so, we can go back and look at the language and the origin stories, and we can look at the different cultural institutions and Blackfoot communities, and we can show how it comes from this place. We can demonstrate that as an example that then, the students will then hopefully reflect on, on their own place. And certainly there was an indigenous culture in Poland as well. And so perhaps through taking our courses, students could get an example that they could then use to help revitalize their own ways, or rekindle, just regrow them. Because as long as you got the ecology of the place, you can always kind of reinvent an indigenous culture that fits that ecology. And so I told them what I don't want is I don't want to be teaching students how to be Blackfoot, and then I don't want to be responsible, down the road a few years, suddenly at the Sundance there's 100, 200 people showing up from Poland to participate. So I don't want to be responsible for something like that. I'm not going to be teaching people how to be Blackfoot, even though I know that people are heavily invested in those kind of projects. They got these native clubs there, and each club takes on like a tribe and tries to learn their language and tries to learn their technologies from the 1800s, and their ceremonies and their cultural institutions and all of this. That's not what I want to be involved in, right? I don't want to be involved in supporting that. I want to show them an example, give them an ethnographic example of what it means to be Indigenous and be connected to place and how that comes about, and then they could reconnect with place there. And the guys who we were talking to said, "Well, yeah, Ryan, I understand what you're saying. I understand your concerns, but you can't change what's in a person's heart." I told him, "No, I can't, but I don't have to teach it to them." And that's where I backed out of the further conversations with them. And actually, I did so kind of against the will of the president of our college, who wanted me to continue to pursue that relationship with them for the revenue. But I just felt like I didn't want to be responsible for teaching people traditional knowledge for the wrong reasons. And so, I backed out and I just didn't continue to pursue it. Now, the idea is, still there. My idea, I wouldn't mind doing distance courses like that people can take and learn about indigeneity, and I can use what I know as an example, but it's more to help them get reconnected with their place than it would be to definitely to try to teach somebody to be Blackfoot or what have you. So those are my responses. If there's one or two of those that you really would prefer I write out, let me know, and I'll get to work on those. And I will look for an excerpt of Narcissus regarding Henry Ford for sure.